Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hi, hey, who's sweating? Because I feel like that's...
It's been hot in Kentucky. It has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Josh, you were telling me you were looking at like climate
Symptoms?
stuff. Yeah. Tell me all about this because it has been miserable outside.
Oh, you're saying like the foreseeable future, or at least this summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pulling together some stuff from the NOAA's Climate Prediction Center for kind of what uh, later summer weather looks like, and it's hot. I think is an easy way to sum it up. It also looks like there's going to be kind of lower precipitation than normal, but the main thing is that it is hot, and we are kind of we started a heat wave a bit ago, and it seems like it's not really going anywhere except for like a few little reprieves here and there.
It seems like in vocabulary, heat domes. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a thing now, heat domes. So, yeah, when
Right.
did that happen?
I mean, the first one that stood out to my memory was like there was one in the Pacific Northwest where it was hitting like 120 degrees in Portland and
Very
summertime.
unusual.
Yeah.
Very unusual. Yeah.
And it's essentially these like kind of persistent systems that don't move on, and the sun just keeps feeding energy into it, and the temperature keeps going up.
Washington D.C. hit was it a couple weeks ago? Record high temperatures.
Yeah.
So
we had
all
a lot
these
of records.
all these records being broken. Yeah.
And the ones that broke around here or in DC earlier this summer were from a heat dome that was in southern Florida that kind of like blew out and then spread over the Midwest.
How dare they?
So okay. I'm just gonna step in here because
bring us back.
As a person who has gone down rabbit holes of climate doom, I like to do that on my own terms, and some of our listeners probably tune in to not go down those rabbit holes of wow, okay, felt myself slipping down it just now. So I'm not here to we are here in extension. We're here part of the university to allegedly stand on science, and science shows that climate change has all sorts of effects on our lives. And if you want to look into that, you can. But
True.
In the short term, we're here today. Let's be present here in this moment today, where it is still hot as all get out. And we want to talk maybe a little bit.
Here.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't sign up for this when I stayed up here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
It has been so hot that we are going north for the first time for our vacation here in a couple of weeks. We plan to go north. I hope that Mackinac Island is really nice this time of year.
I've been there,
yeah.
But we are going north. We normally always go south, and I love going to the southeast. It's beautiful. I love all parts of the U.S. But I've got this infatuation with going north and northeast. The last few years, it has been absolutely on my mind. So we're going to do that this year. Part of it is the high temperatures driving us north. So there you go.
Yeah, that's wise. I mean, right? You see birds going in a direction. Not a bad idea.
I mean, if
you see presidential families moving to their compound on an island off of the coast of Maine.
It's in the signs and symptoms.
From Texas.
Signs and symptoms. Yeah, whatever.
You should move. There's a butterfly garden at like not garden. What do they call them when it's like a greenhouse?
Oh, yes. It's like not an estuary, but something like that that has a specific term. Yeah.
They have one of those on Mackinac Island, and it's a really nice one. So I recommend.
I've never been there, so I really look forward to it. I like the fact that there's going to be no cars. No motorized vehicles on the island, so we are going there. Yeah,
there's a lot of fudge involved, also. So.
Yeah, that was personally my main reason. Had nothing to do with the weather.
There are some places that have fudge. It's not like the whole island is made of fudge, which is kind of what the impression I got from Alexis just now.
Well, I've heard that the whole island's.
I'm not wrong, right? So
I'm excited.
When it comes to fudge, it's a Mac a yes from me, dog.
Yeah, it's not a Mac a no.
Mac a no.
That's right.
Well, for those of us who are not going north and are going to continue to stay here and be sweaty, what have you all been doing to kind of combat that? Those of you who are doing some garden work and field work or whatever, or what did you do in the past? Because I know you all have
Well, before,
experience in different
Yeah.
areas.
before we jump in, I just want to point out we as we were going down memory lane, we realized that we did an episode on heat stress, particularly in plants, about a
Mhm.
year ago. And, things change in the world, but things haven't changed so much that episode wouldn't be worth a listen going back, popping over there. And it was almost exactly a year ago that episode came out, last
We were
June.
hot then. We're still
Timing.
hot
Yeah,
now.
it
It's
turns
on our
out we
minds.
have,
It is on our minds, people. Yeah.
but so today maybe we're talking a little bit more about just like living as a human being out in those spaces, obviously
Mhm.
crossing over into horticulture, but horticulture, the business or the culture of horticulture, part of that is being a human being with sensitivities to all kinds of weather and other events. So that's just a little bit of a context. But Ray, you were saying?
I forget what I was
Oh,
saying.
I was gonna
Oh
say.
shoot!
Can't take
Yeah. I
care
was,
of
Also, if you're an
plants.
alien,
we
Yeah.
started talking about like what's going on in the garden. I have noticed something really interesting this year. I kind of moved gardens down below the hill, and there's some shade down there. It's next to Elkhorn Creek here in
Oh,
where I live
nice.
in Scott County. But I moved the garden down there, and it's not the biggest space in the world. But I'm switching from containers to in-ground gardens because I have that luxury. Pretty good soil down there next to Elkhorn. But I planted pretty dense this year, whereas in the past, when I had a home garden and had much more space, I planted things in rows because that's what we did commercially on the farm. You plant things in rows, keep them orderly, and there's lots of reasons to do that. But I planted really dense this year, lots of, summer squash and zucchini, and even the tomatoes I put so close to the bush cucumbers, they're fighting it out in a death struggle right now. But things are planted very close. And there is no sunlight reaching the ground. And it has been incredible. Two things with its density of planting. Well, I guess three things. The bad thing is it's kind of hard to harvest. I have to get in there very carefully. Unlike my 10-year-old son, who is like the Kool-Aid man in the garden, he just breaks his way in through my beautiful zucchini. It just tears me up. But
Oh yeah.
yes, exactly. But two very positive things that I've noticed with that density of planting in my small space, I want to take advantage of every inch. Is that very few weed problems? I weeded partially one time this year, and then you know how quick like squash and things grow and cucumbers, they cover the ground very quickly. So the shading kept the weeds from growing, but my water usage in ground has been half of what I would normally need because there's
Mm.
this canopy over the soil. And my only concern is that all the plants fight their way to some sort of sunlight and they produce enough of a crop for me because it's just a home garden, remember, not commercial. But it's I've had some real benefits this year, and I'm seeing those benefits now that in weeding and not having to water as much, and that makes me really happy that my garden is down there, and I'm seeing those things. So that's a little bit different for me this year, and I'm kind of digging it. I'm kind of
Would
digging
you
it.
say that? I mean, so they're getting a little. It's more dappled sunlight. You'd say that
There
they're
on the
getting.
fringes, it is. In fact, where it is more, where I have less sunlight, that's where the onions. And I've continued to grow lettuce in the truly dappled areas. It has natural shade with some evening sun. So I'm unaccustomed to growing lettuce in my home garden this late in the year and at this hot. But yeah, Josh, yeah,
Oh
there's
yeah,
some
I was.
dappled sun. Yeah.
Is it kind of? Would you say it's making some of the plants like a little bit leggier that you've noticed, or they
No,
seem?
there is enough direct sunlight during the day to where everything has fought through and formed like this canopy, so that most everything, there's maybe one tomato plant that the squash is really trying to take over. I've noticed a couple of tomato plants have gotten just, they're stretching, they're exfoliating or stretching towards the sun. And I have noticed that. And they're not going to do great. They're not going to have maximum production. But in my home garden, that is not my goal. It's more of a goal not to have to water as much or have to weed as much. But this summer's been a different experience during this hot weather. And I guess it's because of the density of planting that I have going on down there. So that's what's going on in my garden right now. And it's hot. It's very hot. And I guess the soil is getting shaded. And so I'm starting to see some of the benefits of the way I helter skelter planted things. And then my wife, Jennifer, has her own flower bed. She has big blocks of flowers that, she kind of puts down there, and she basically, I'm just horrified when she takes 10 packs of whatever flowers that she picks up and just throws them out there, English garden style, like a commando. And that type A in my brain is
Hyperventilating.
just, yes, I hyperventilate, and they're the most beautiful things right now. It's gorgeous. They're technically too dense. She's not done anything much with them, and she just picks beautiful bouquets all summer. I mean, how does that even work? But she has, I guess, subscribed to the high density planting philosophy, like me in our home garden this year. Yeah. So a lot going on in the garden. It's a new space for me, and it's a lot of fun. I have some shade where I can grow the cool season stuff like lettuce that doesn't like the heat that we've been getting. But I also have enough sunlight to kind of throw it all together really thickly and just see what I get. It's a hot mess. I'll need to send you guys a picture. But I'm harvesting a lot off of it. So hey, I'm not gonna argue with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like the first farm that I worked on was in coastal Georgia, and I mean not on the coast. It was like a few miles inland, so there was no nice coastal breeze. It was just like clouds of sand gnats and stuff.
Ugh.
Oh, nice.
But it was kind of this the actual plot was probably about 12 acres of mixed vegetable, but there was a section that we had left this large. I believe it was a live oak that cast like kind of a decent like dappled shaded area, and we would do lettuce and stuff like that down there. And it was so much more pleasant, like working
Hmm.
just in the vicinity of that kind of
Yeah.
shade tree. It made such a huge
Yeah.
difference than being just out on the land and you're the thing casting the tallest shadow, like getting
Yeah.
roasted.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that gets in my head too, and I'm in the middle of a big field, and there is, like you said, no shade inside. There's just you can't get away from it. The only shade
Yeah,
you're making is your own, so it's
right. Yeah,
pretty
and
tough.
honestly, they don't make a hat big enough.
No, the brim is not wide enough to get away from the sun on some days. That's
So
exactly right.
interesting note on the they don't make a hat big enough. So
Mm.
well, I mean, I run into that experience regularly just because of the size of my head, but that's not what I'm referencing here. There's a company that I have gotten fitted hats from several times. Big palm straw hats, well made and like I said, fitted to size. And I was ordering one, the other one's thrashed from being in the sun so much. I was ordering another one, and I wanted to get their biggest brim, which was the brand or the model of it was called El Humongo.
Nice, very appropriate
And
terminology.
any for better or for worse, who's to say, shot that down and did not.
Forbidden.
Dude.
I'm pretty sure, like I legitimately don't think I could have walked through a door with it
Well, yeah.
on.
But are you wearing it through a doorway? You wearing it outside? Is what I'm
That's
saying.
right. That's exactly right. But and just a quick shout out, bald boy tip for the heat. So I started wearing a couple years ago. The brand name is Buffs, but they're these like it's sort of like a handkerchief crossed with a bandana crossed with a scarf, and it's a tube of material, and you
Mm.
could pull the thing over your head. You see, like I used to see like people fishing, particularly off the
Mhm.
coast, wearing them quite a lot because they
Hmm.
can't have UPF
Yeah.
ratings, but you can wear it in all kinds of different configurations. But something that Ray and Alexis will not understand, but the bald among our listeners will, is that when you don't have hair on your head, it's sort of like having land with no cover crop on it during a heavy rainstorm. There is
Mm.
nothing to hold back the torrents of sweat coming down, and the buff has functioned to replace, or at least it's like
Nice.
like the mesh that they put down on the side of slopes, when they're trying to prevent
Sowing
erosion.
grassy.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. But the buffs have made like a huge difference in my life in the heat because it like
Mm.
soaks up sweat. It keeps you a little
Yeah.
cool. It protects you from the sun, and you can slip a hat on top of it.
Mhm.
So I
And
stack my sun protection, but a good hat, man. People who are out in the heat and they're not wearing
I don't know
like
how they do it.
full brim action. Yeah.
the back of my neck has never, I am blonde, but even after years of, like leaning over when I was younger, it just never, it would always burn the back of my
Mhm.
neck. So until I learned to wear, I'm like, no, this cowboy hat has function. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
It's not pretty. It's not
My
pretty.
my blonde husband also he wears this big hat that has like the long neck gaiter on the back, and
Oh
so
yeah.
he rolls it down so it keeps his neck from, or he'll wear like like a sun protection shirt. Like it's a very light one, but
Yeah.
it's a button up with a collar, and he'll flip the collar up just to keep his neck from, or he'll wear those neck gaiters like you were describing, Brett. But he'll pull it down kind of over and wear it like a little turtleneck. Which I don't love having stuff on my neck when I'm hot like that, even if it's soaking up sweat. Like I have to just be shaded in some way.
I know
Yeah,
that.
To be clear, I
makes
put it
sense,
on my
yeah.
head
Mhm.
like a bandana,
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
not
So
around my
is it
neck.
not
Mhm.
like a what is it, baklava or baklava?
Yeah, not like
Yeah,
Baklava
you
Right.
wouldn't want to
is
put
it
that with that
delicious?
stuff. Yeah,
I store it. If
yeah,
I put it on my neck, I store some baklava in there
yeah.
Mm.
for snacking
It's
later
like,
and with
you
hands
put the
free.
hoodie on backwards, so it's got like the little bucket with
Yes,
food
For
in
it
your
it
has a
cat?
built-in food
for
trough.
yourself.
Yes,
Now
For
you're
your cat in
yeah.
there.
multifunctional.
But all this tech gear is really amazing. I know Straw Hat, which I love those. Those have been around for a long time. But a lot of the tech gear, the materials
Mhm.
that you can get now, is just really cool. Not literally, but also literally, is good stuff. I mean, they work. The lightweight materials, the lighter color of materials. It is amazing what a difference that makes when you, if you're working outside a lot, that you invest in some of those versus something like a 100% cotton that once that gets saturated, it is going to cause
Right.
some chafing and some problems, some heat retention, all sorts of bad things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Loose
I
Yeah.
mean,
is
I think
totally the way to go.
Yeah.
I would confess. I think I, in general, am becoming, and I've told people this left and right. I'm becoming more of a hot weather guy as I get older.
Mm.
Okay. You're in your hot guy
I
phase.
will never enjoy working in the heat. I
Yeah,
just don't.
that's
That's just
different.
not. That's
Mm.
off the table. But I used to hate even just like hanging out in the heat and like spending any amount of time in the heat. Um, and as I get older, I don't know. I'm less sensitive to it or something because
I feel like you
it's
appreciate it more. Like after you've gone through so many winters, and winters as an adult are not as fun as winters as a kid, right? Like you don't get to go sled riding as much. You don't get all the days off of school. You know what I mean? So there's not,
yeah,
What are you
we also
talking about? I
don't
haven't
get
been
the
to school in
snow.
years.
yeah. I got
There's
infinite days off.
there's
All the
not as
days.
much snow as there used to be either. So even if you wanted to do those kinds of cool things, so I think as an adult, it's not nearly as fun in the winter, and so the summer just becomes a reprieve. At least this is the way my brain is thinking because I hate hot weather, but it's become more of a reprieve. Um, and so I appreciate the time that away from the really cold, and yeah, and I just there's something about it, and you just get more used to it. Like and there's also I always want to, like, part of how I deal with the heat as someone who does have to work in the field, and a lot of my crops are coming in regardless of how hard I try in the dead of summer. Like, and so
I love
there's
that
just
phrase, the dead of
the
summer.
dead of summer.
The dead of summer.
Because that's how I feel. So like I really have to adjust my schedule. And so I'm getting up really early and often
Mhm.
Yes.
staying up late, and then I have to like sometimes I just have to nap in the middle of the day, or I
Oh,
get like my
yeah.
indoor chores done because otherwise I would not get nearly enough sleep. So I'm like, what do the dogs do? And the dogs nap in the middle of the day. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm going to do. But
Dog
Everybody
days of
does, right?
summer.
You
There you
move
go.
towards the equator, that like kind of siesta action is
Mhm.
just a thing that people do.
And it's
Functional. Yeah.
necessary. Yeah, it's functional. Like it's not
Mhm.
like you being lazy. You've spent just as much time
Yeah.
outside working. It's just you're splitting that up. And so I've that little afternoon nap is really nice. And so I've come to equate summer with at least getting a nap in the middle of the day. And so there's some joy that comes with
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. I
I think
remember
that's a
working for,
huge one, is that
yeah,
kind of breaking up
modify
the
your schedule.
workday. Because my first farm job was like kind of, I don't know if I'd call it banker's hours, but it was attempting to conform to the, we
Mhm.
start early and
9
we
to
work
5.
to the late afternoon or whatever. And of course, late afternoon is brutal, right? Like
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
pushing that extra 30 minutes is just killing you. And then my second job, it was like more open and flexible. And they had adopted this kind of, we would start crazy early,
Mhm.
just before sunup and work till like 10:30ish and then
Mhm.
knock off until like,
Mhm.
I don't know, 6ish, something like that. And then work till the sun's gone, which,
Mhm.
Yeah.
can be like 9 o'clock. So we'd get these like 9, 10 hour days of work,
But
but
you're
it
not
wasn't, yeah, I
exhausted
wasn't
in the
dying.
same way.
I
Yeah.
could go
Yeah.
run my errands in the mid part of the day. Oh, I got to go to the bank. They got air conditioning. This is fabulous.
And it's easy to say if you have to work out. I remember, working on the farm, and we'd work with family and a few other
Hmm.
folks. And it's one thing to say, "Oh, you should recognize when you're getting too hot. I mean, just go sit down." But that's not the way like heat exhaustion
Totally.
works.
Yeah.
That's not the you don't know that it's
Yeah.
happening. By the time you think something's going on, it's already too
In
late.
fact,
So,
your ability to know that you are in trouble is impaired by the heat.
yes.
Right. Yeah. The
Yes.
danger zone. I remember like that South Georgia job. I remember harvesting some zucchini one day, and it was like a triple heat index day. Let's just say it was brutal outside, right? And we were approaching that like noon hour, and I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna run out there and grab these couple of things real quick." And I remember noticing that like I suddenly went from being miserable to like, "Hey, this actually kind of isn't so bad."
You
And
were
Yeah.
like the
and my head was
drowning.
kind of like swimmy, and I was like, I'm in trouble.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Well, when you feel like you're breathing in hot wax, or when you realize that the air you're breathing in is really hot, it's not a good
Yeah.
sign. It's not a
Right.
good
Yeah.
sign. Yeah.
That isn't cooling you. Nothing's cooling you anymore.
No, transpiration
God,
is not
I
working.
hate the cotton mouth, that like blech,
Mm.
gross.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
playing sports in the summer and
Oh
the
yeah.
brutal heat, and just I had it the other day, and just not drinking enough water for how much I was sweating, and I was like,
Yeah.
why is my
And
mouth just blech?
and that's a brutal one too. It's like the symptoms of dehydration are like confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Anything where the symptom is confusion, that's a problem for me because I generally walk around in a state of
Yeah,
confusion.
same.
It's like, is this normal or is this
Right.
abnormal?
Right. Is this a
Yeah.
dangerous confusion or just my
Like
typical?
regular confusion.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a somewhat famous graphic you've probably seen around that's put out by the CDC and in collaboration with NOAA, the Josh referenced earlier, and NIOSH and others. But the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke, and so heat exhaustion being the less severe of the two, and then the heat stroke being the holy moly. But heat exhaustion is dizziness, thirst, heavy sweating, nausea, weakness, and then it advances to heat stroke when the confusion starts setting in, dizziness starts setting in, and then unconsciousness. Um, and
Right. Yeah.
so
And
you
heat exhaustion.
you won't even know if you hit the last the
Right.
last
Yeah.
criteria or not.
You may not be
Yeah.
aware of that yet.
Well, and heat exhaustion, the solution isn't to push through it for a few more minutes to get this thing done. It's like, no,
No,
go to a cooler area.
Yes,
don't drink
cool
ice
off,
water.
drink some water. I think for me, one of the things that I have to do, and I don't work in the heat. Well, I can basically stop working in the heat whenever I want to because it's always just for quote fun end quote. Now,
Right.
but the when I had to do it a little bit more for pay, um, I think I would almost, I don't know that I ever did exactly set but I would keep an eye on the time and set a timer for like every 30 minutes go and drink a good
Mm,
amount of water even if you don't feel like it.
mm-hmm.
And like every hour and a half go and like sit in the shade somewhere and just check in with yourself. And then you may
Mm-hmm.
sit there for
Yeah.
5 minutes and be like, I'm cool, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
But every once in a while, you're going to go and do that. And it's like, oh,
Yeah, things
okay.
were
I
getting a
was
little
not
dicey
good.
out there. Right.
Yeah. And that's the only, and I think, watching out for other people, if you're working with other
Yeah.
people, it's kind of hard if you're by yourself.
Yeah, that's a
Gosh.
really
Yeah.
important one is because like I was lucky enough to start my first couple of seasons in a situation where there were lots of other experienced workers around
Yeah.
and they could stop me from being an idiot.
Right.
And
Somebody stop
there are
me.
a lot of ag workers who are just working on their own. And you could,
Mm-hmm.
if you're getting
Totally.
started or messing around, like, yeah, I think that timer thing is a really sharp strategy because the thing goes off and, hey, go drink water and check in.
Yeah.
I know when I say to myself, I think I need to sit down, like because I've just stumbled around for a minute, that I need
Right.
to go like out of the heat and sit down.
I remember one of the things that like I would say to people would be like, look, it's better to sit down than to fall down.
Mm,
Mm.
yeah, I'm
It always goes smoother when in
I,
doubt.
or yeah, when the dogs have refused to come out. So I have
Yeah.
that's how I
Your little
know. Yeah.
canary in the coal mine dog.
Yeah, yeah. So the other day I got up early, went out at like 5:30 and was working outside before, and it was going to be like 93 that day. And I was starting to get hot, and I was looking around, looking for the dogs. Usually they lay in the shade because they're smart, but they lay where they can see me. That's important to them, right?
Sure.
And I didn't see them anywhere, and I knew it was too hot for them to have like meandered away. They're not going to be doing that. Well, my cooler is in the barn, and there's a little bit of air that escapes under the door, so they'll
Nice.
lay in front of that. So I know that if they're in there and they're not even willing to come check on me and they won't come when I call them, it's too hot and I need to go
They're
inside.
like, "You're on your own, mom.
They're like,
You're on your own."
no,
Right.
no, we ain't doing that. Like she
Right.
dumb.
Right. I
Yeah.
don't want to watch mom die, so let's
They're
just not
Yeah.
be
basically
there.
just the opposite of cats. They're
Yeah.
laying by the cooler,
Yeah.
the cool spot. They're laying by
My
that.
my
Yeah.
s- youngest corgi has a little bit of like a longer hair than my older one does, and he will like run me over when I open the cooler to put stuff in, like run me over to try and get inside. And I'm like, dude, you don't live in the cooler. I worry about him sometimes. He'll
He's
be in
like,
there
oh,
for a
it's just
long.
like Wales where my people are from.
Yeah.
Yeah. More moderate in
Yeah,
there.
I was like, "You're not a husky. You don't just live in the cooler, bro. Like it's 37 degrees. Come on."
I
Oh,
think one
yes.
thing, as far as the tasks maybe that change
Mm,
in the hot weather, and like
mhm.
we talked about, like, maybe the structure of the day,
Mhm.
but I think it's pretty staggering sometimes how much water plants can take up and transpire this time of year. And then sometimes where it's like I've put in as much water as I can down, and it's just we're just gonna have to get through this together because
Yeah.
you aren't able to move water fast enough. And um, I of course have in my, again, just backyard personal setup, I have things that are either tolerant and even seem to enjoy the abuses of a variable climate, which is the native plants we have planted back there, and then bonsai, the most helpless. Like, I have no reserves. I need this care, and so it's kind of a blend of those two. But I do still tend to water some of the plants that have flowers on them right now, just to keep up the
Mhm.
nectar flow
Yeah.
for the bees. Um, just as a vibe, more so than anything. The plants don't care. They would be happy to just sort of have dry flowers, but you know, I like to take care of the butterflies and wasps and bees and other insect friends. But as far as like tasks and stuff when it's hotter, how do you orient differently? What are you watching out for as far as taking care of plants
Well,
when
the
it's
have
hot?
tos, that's all the newly planted things. We have a lot of that discussion. We get lots of so-called disease calls beginning with hot weather. And one of the first questions I ask about, well, how long has a plant been established in its current location? And if they say 3 years or less, I'm like, well, that's not really an option. If we're in an extended dry spell, you need to water. But I know we've talked about this some on different episodes, and some episodes dedicated to just this. But I'll go into the whole discussion of, you not only need to water, you need to water if it's 10 gallons a week for a newly established tree, for instance. That's a standard recommendation during dry spells, about 10 gallon a week. There's some other factors, but that's roughly the amount. It's not 10 gallons running out of a water hose in 3 minutes. It's 10 gallons slowly put onto the plant, like with a plant bag, or a 5 gallon
Drip.
bucket with a tiny hole poked in it. However, you can drip that on there with a soaker hose or whatever. But the newly established plants is what I think of first, that don't really have um, lots of root systems to support them in this challenging weather. I think of those things first.
And thinking of next year's bloom, so we all know my brain always goes to, yeah, flowers, but this could be true of any perennial fruit crops or something like that. And so what you do this year matters for next year. So
Hmm.
if you're getting 7, 10, 14 days where you've not had rain, and if you're getting 7 days where you've not had rain, your temperature's up that high, you need to be applying some water if you want it. Those plants might live, but if you're wanting a good display in your home garden, or if you are selling plants as a crop, what you do this year to get it through those problems is going to influence that crop for next year. So, from a perennial standpoint, yeah, sure, the plants will live, but at what cost?
Yeah. And in zone 6 and 7 that we're in, sitting here physically in here in the central part of the state, it was always a challenge. It's always a challenge for commercial growers that if they're doing fall crops, especially commercially, and we have these late extended heat spells, that's really tough on your cold crops, COLE, cold crops, and can and really be tough on those transplants. And I don't know what you do on a commercial scale. You have a few more options as a homeowner as far as shading, extra, care with watering, but commercial crops, that's the last thing you want to see for your fall crops being newly planted in the ground, and these, triple degree days kind of sneak up on you for several days in a row, and that can really damage those new transplants. So you have to really watch your water schedule, and in some of those cases you're watering not for the water, you're watering to cool the soil to try to get some of those temps down
Mhm.
any way that you can, commercially, especially. But homeowners have a few more options. Once again, you can, use shade cloths and some other things, some other techniques to kind of manage the heat. But I think about those commercial producers and their limited options when they put out their cool season crops and it's still 99 degrees.
Mhm.
That can be really tough on newly planted things, especially depending on how you plant it. If you're planting on plastic, I mean, that's hot enough to where a broccoli plant will lean against the side of the plastic and
Mm.
just physically get burned and die. So you're thinking about all of those things when you put out, crops all the time. So it's a tough time of year for those transitional crops, those late season crops here in our area. I know. So
Yeah,
that's kind
I
of a tough
think
situation.
with plastic culture, it can always be kind of tricky sometimes, even with irrigation. Like if we get rainfall, sometimes the rainfall seems to work its way into the root zone, but if it's not an
Mhm.
extensive, soaking one, then you still kind of have to irrigate. And I heard someone say, as a general rule, something they'd observed in people is that inexperienced people tend to water too much when plants are young and not
Mhm.
enough when they're old or
Mhm.
bigger. And that's like annuals, even, that um, you soak them and want to take care of them, those tomato plants, when they're little tiny things, but then when they're these huge biomass things that have all these leaves that are transpiring off water, and you don't give it enough
Yeah.
water and it gets blossom end rot. Well, what happened? Apply a little bit of that doting watering that you were doing early in the year to later in the year, and
Tomatoes are
it's yeah,
incredible. Yeah. I've got 8 or 10 tomato plants and they're in about, I don't know, 8 to 10 gallon containers along the side of the
Mhm.
garden. Most of my garden is in the ground this year, but I did maintain some of those containers, move those down to my new garden location. I water those twice a day now.
Mhm.
And
yeah,
they're not even into the pink stage of tomato production, like they have little tomatoes on there, golf ball sizes currently, a little bit bigger than that now. I got a late start, but it's absolutely incredible. And when I lift up the side of that pot, I'm like, my gosh, I just watered this thing this morning and it's already dry again by late evening. It's amazing. Yeah.
yeah. I
How
mean,
much water
that's
it takes.
an interesting aspect of, you mentioned the kind of using the water just to cool things down, and that transpiration is part of the mechanism. There is plants being able to cool themselves down, that they,
Mhm.
just
Like
like we
Hmm.
sweating.
sweat, and our as the water evaporates, the area around it, the temperature drops. It's the same way with plants. And so when you're watering them, yes, you're helping them stay not wilty and all those other things, but part of it is too, they're sitting baking in that heat, and they need a way to move that heat off, and that transpiration process. So I remember talking about the evapotranspiration rate, and it goes up when it's hot, and
Mhm.
especially if the humidity's low and it's hot, it's even higher. And so that is that air, it's just water is spontaneously evaporating, but it's also being transpired off
Hmm.
through the leaves. And so the amount of water that you're losing when it's really hot, I mean, we know this intuitively, but the amount of water you're losing in all kinds of different ways is increased drastically when it's hot, and it adds the cause, or the call for the mulch, like we spent an hour talking about on a
Hmm.
previous episode, how awesome mulch is and how helpful it can be in
Bare
retaining
soil is
water.
not what you want in these
Yeah.
hot days. I mean, yeah, and I think that's part of the reason my garden has done well with a little bit of with less water this year is that there's no soil in there in my garden much that sees the sun right now. It's all covered. It's pretty thick in there, like a mini jungle.
I
I
do
think
wanna
another, oops, sorry, go ahead.
I do wanna remind, if you are dealing with, which I have seen in Kentucky this year, because we've had days where our humidity is extremely high and it is in the 90s, and we are looking at, close to 90% humidity, at least at my house, and according to my weather station. And
The air immediately surrounding my body.
yeah, that too. When you feel like you hit a brick wall walking out the door. But a lot of the time, you were talking about that transpiration where a plant is pulling water through the root system up through the leaves, right? And it's basically sweating out of its leaves. When you have high humidity, you don't get that pressure that allows that imbalance of pressure that allows that plant to bring water up through the root system and out. So you can have wilty plants even when your soil is wet, because it's not able to move that water out and make itself cool down. And so there's really nothing you can do about that unless you want to put fans on them or something, which is why fans in high tunnels can be really great. But it can be really hard to deal with. So don't like feel bad about it. I, I say I feel bad because I had a woman who actually just called me today, and she's really concerned about her tomatoes, and she was like, I think I just need to just pull them out. And I was like, no, like it's okay, it doesn't have to be perfect to still be good. And don't let that be perfection be the enemy of the good there. But it's okay if it will recover, and if it looks better by the next morning, then chances are you don't have a disease problem, like a cucumber verticillium wilt. But we see it a lot in really big leaved plants. They just can't move water out of their leaves. So just wanted to give that little tip.
I like that.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
kind
know,
of a
It's like
weird.
that feeling when you keep sweating and you're not getting any cooler because it's so humid.
Right, right.
It's the
yeah.
same thing
Yeah,
because your sweat's not evaporating. So the
Right.
whole
right.
point of sweating is that it goes on your skin, it evaporates and cools you down. But if it's so humid that it's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's
an
nowhere for it
imbalance.
to go,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, like
Honestly,
the
go
air can't
inside at
absorb
that
any
point.
more
Like,
water.
don't.
I remember, I worked the summer out in New Mexico with some guys who are from like Four Corners area, lived there their whole lives, and yeah, it gets real hot there, right? In the summertime, real bright, real shiny, like 100 degrees, but it's not a humid place, so getting in the shade is pretty chill. And anyway, these two brothers came and visited me in Lexington, like when I was in undergrad, to kind of check out. They were doing like a little tour of the U.S. And I remember when the older brother got out of the car, this guy Walt, he was like, "What is wrong with the air? This is miserable." He's like
Why
shaking his
can I
shirt.
chew it?
Yeah, and it was probably like 75% humidity, something that we would think of as like, it's kind of
Normal.
muggy out.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was like, "This is terrible." Like he just kept pulling at his shirt and trying to fan himself. He's
It's
like,
not great.
"Something's wrong with your air."
Your air is
Yeah.
broken.
Felt.
Well, and
Yeah.
one thing too, I think you could think about a little bit as far as taking care of yourself in the heat is in general with like processes. I think producers and people who are technically minded and thinking about continuous improvement, they think about ways that production practices could be improved. But I think another thing that you can think about is ways that you can shape the environment to better take care of yourself. And so, like, there are spots maybe where you could put in a simple sun sail or a pop up 10 by 10,
Yeah.
like one of those pop up tents or something like that. Even if it's a small area where you're walking back and forth between two buildings, and every time you walk out there, it's just beating down sun, like little things, improvements like that to the environment. Maybe it's like somehow constructing a space closer to the field that is shaded
Yeah.
and comfortable and has
For
access to water
processing.
and all those things. So you don't have to for processing or for taking a beat. So you don't have to have a 4-minute walk in the beating down heat back to your shade.
Yeah.
I think that's just one of those, we think about production systems and we think about maximizing efficiency in those ways, but there's also, small changes you can make that will keep you from passing out and going to the hospital, which is a big boost to
Mhm.
efficiency and productivity because you will do zero work while you are laid up with heat stroke.
Right.
Um,
That
Facts.
that reminds me of like there was kind of a rule like when you were trying to figure out a fertilizer application or something like that, something that involved doing some kind of math. The rule was don't do math in the direct sunlight. Like when you're
Yeah.
doing a calculation, get into the barn. It's not going to come out. You're not going to get it right.
There's this urgency to stay alive while you're out in the full sun in Kentucky summers. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels accurate. I saw a farmer, they were harvesting carrots and it was, 90 degrees outside recently. And so they just put a pop up tent up and they harvested carrots and then
Yeah.
moved the pop up
Nice.
tent because they were doing it by hand, right? And so then they would just move the pop up
Slick.
tent like every couple minutes. And I was like, genius.
I know, right? Einstein over here.
Well, that's one of the motivations when I told you we relocated just the home garden. But one of the things I wanted to do is one side of the lower yard next to the creek it's shaded by a bunch of boxed elder trees, just so it's some scrub trees, but a whole grove of those things of boxed elder trees down there. So we drug down a couple Adirondack chairs down there next
Oh,
and built a
nice.
fire pit. And so that's off to the side of the garden. And it's a really pleasant place to just go and sit
Mm.
Mhm.
because it never gets that hot. It seems like if it's 100 degrees out, it'll be 20 degrees cooler under those trees, but it's not far from the garden. And it's amazing how much more we go down there and,
Mhm.
kind of mess around, look at the garden, water the garden. Jennifer goes and picks her flowers, but it's a nice place to be because it's a comfortable place to get out of the
Yeah.
sun in and out. Once again,
Is
it's
it
a home garden,
yeah.
so we can kind of do that.
Is it deep enough for you to just lay in the water in the creek?
It is. We swim a lot down there. We've
Nice.
got
Yes.
video evidence. We fish and swim and kayak and do all the things. And I think it's the largest creek that's not a river in the state. So yeah, we have fun down next to the creek. But there's lots of trees and I wish we had more sunlight for the garden sometimes because we don't get full sun exposure down there. But I would take the trade offs any day because it's really pleasant. But there's
Did
lots
you
of
say
chiggers in those trees, so that's the
it's
only
Elkhorn?
thing. Elkhorn Creek, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lots of smallmouth bass
Yeah,
anecdotally
well, I
in
was
that
gonna say
creek, so
it was used to be at least one of the premier smallmouth bass
oh,
creeks
there's lots
in
of
the
fish
United
still in there.
States.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's good fishing.
Teddy Roosevelt fished the Elkhorn and
Oh,
like wrote
really?
about it in his journals and stuff. Yeah.
Dang. I mean, there's
Wow.
still lots of good fish in there, so tell Tyler, hey, anytime there's kayaks down on the creek, so, yeah,
He's
it's
a
but yeah,
he's a
it's good
well,
stuff.
boatman now, so
Oh,
well, so
man. What kaяк's
the
a boat?
does anybody else have any other aspects of the heat kind of?
I will just give a shout out to home lawns. I mean, I know how you guys love home lawns.
they're
Hey,
So
fine.
I'm moderate here, okay?
okay. Okay. I like moderation in some things, but home lawns when it's this hot, and most of our home lawns, I'm just making a baseline assumption that well, most home lawns here that I've dealt with are cool season grasses, bluegrass, and mostly some kind of fescue. But the last thing you want to do is mow short because you mow short, then the sunlight penetrates into the ground and it's already dry and it gets drier because of more sunlight penetration. It's a vicious, never ending cycle. So you have to be careful with mowing short, especially this time of year. Leave your grass long. And what you're trying to do is improve the health of the plant in multiple ways. But one of the main things you're doing is simply trying to shade the ground by mowing just as high as you can. And the next thing you have to be careful of is mowing anytime it's 90 degrees or so out. You're doing damage to your home lawn. It causes a tremendous
And
amount of
And
yourself.
stress
yourself, yeah.
and
Right.
yourself.
Your
But I
mind.
said, yeah, I had to work with these commercial. One of the things I did before, my current position was I worked with a landscape company, and there was just a lot of damage to these big commercial landscapes, and it wasn't comfortable for the crews. So we adopted a policy after a while. We didn't do that during the middle of the day if it was very hot and very dry for the grass's health and for the mowing crew's health, both of those things. So watch out for your home lawn. Anytime it's hot and dry, the less you can mow, the better. The higher you can mow, the better. Don't fertilize uh, when those conditions are present, unless you're, fully irrigated, then it's fine. You can be on a more aggressive fertility schedule. If you're, commercial turf and you're fully irrigated, it's fine. But if you're a typical homeowner with no irrigation, don't fertilize when it's hot and dry. And you be very, very cautious about any kind of weed control that you put down because that can act as an additional stressor to your home lawn, and that will cause you problems when it's hot and dry out like it has been
So just leave
in
your
Kentucky.
lawn alone when it's hot and dry, okay?
Leave it alone.
Just leave it
Leave it
alone.
alone.
Mhm.
It's struggling for its life there. So yeah, just kind of chill out on your lawn. Yeah.
And wear
When
your
in
sunscreen.
the early years when our lawn was a little more robust, I would intentionally cut it ahead of
You
hot,
would
hot periods
threaten
because I
it.
was trying to like take some of the vitality out of it, so I didn't have to cut
Yeah,
it as
yeah,
much.
yeah. I was gonna say, if you're mad at your lawn, scalp it. Now is the
Yeah.
time.
Go after it.
I would
Go
not go out
after
and
it.
do it when it was 90 degrees, but I would try to do it so it had to go through 90 degrees freshly cut. So that's, I don't know.
It's
Make
I
like
it
getting a
bald with
haircut. That's like
yeah,
a cutting
bald with
off
no
all of
hat.
your hair. Yes, yes. That's a good one. I like to remember that, Josh. That's perfect.
well,
Perfect.
I guess one strategy for dealing with the heat is to flee from it.
Run like a coward.
Yeah. And in our hemisphere that includes going north, as Ray said about vacations.
Hmm.
But some of us may be doing that in a more
In a less
yeah
vacation sort of way.
Yeah,
yeah more
less vacationy.
So Brett is referring to, this is my last episode because I will be leaving. I'm taking a job up in Vermont, which has a little bit cooler climate. They describe their summers as mild, which that works for me.
Which is how we describe our winters here. So
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very similar in the Köppen Climate Index to this place in northern Kentucky. It's like they describe it as precipitation throughout, whereas here it's hot summers. There it's mild summers.
Did you know the average temperature up there? Just curious, Josh. I've got this fascination. I've told Josh before with Vermont any which
I
way, but
don't have the average temperature memorized,
yeah,
unfortunately, but they
it's
do.
gonna be a
They get
pleasant
pretty
surprise.
routine, like snow coverage. It's very similar to kind of very blue side of the mountains, eastern Kentucky and West Virginia. It's a very like mountain forest state. But yes, that is a somewhat of a longer range, drastic strategy for beating the heat. Would be to run for your life.
I want
yeah
maple syrup sent to me or else.
daily.
Yes,
Or
authentic
else.
Vermont
Yeah,
maple
yeah.
syrup.
That is their like big commodity. That's kind of like fascinating to me. Is their big ones are maple syrup and cheese, and I mean that was part of the
Literally two of my favorite things. So
yeah
like
the interview process was I just drank a quart of maple syrup and ate a 1 pound block of
and they were
cheddar,
like,
and they
if
were
you
like,
throw up, you're
"This
fired.
guy is part of the solution."
Yeah.
Well, you will be missed.
Thank you. Well, and you know, if you want awkward interjections, you'll have to make them yourselves from now on.
God, I feel like I do everything around here.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, I don't. With this group, I don't think it'll be a problem. Yeah,
But we're
Well,
gonna explore and see about maybe a different fourth host potentially. But Josh, obviously, the four of us started this from the beginning. We're well over a year now of podcasting, and it's been a lot of fun. And obviously, we thank you, and we'll miss you. But we wish you the best of luck in Vermont. And we
Maybe I could be
will,
like a foreign correspondent, you know, like periodically check in as a guest.
yeah, wearing like
how
a
about
light
like a
sweater in
Yeah,
June,
I'll have like a flannel on and like a Henley or something, maybe
perfect?
a wool cap, checking
I
in
like
from
that.
the
it'll be
igloo.
July.
You can
Splitting
be like,
splitting
we'll
wood
call
during
you.
the
Yeah,
podcast.
this is our Northern Sentinel checking in.
Hey, the moguls are high today. Snowboarding is clutch.
Well, yeah, I'm disappointed, but also super pumped for you. Makes me sad.
You are a disappointment,
This is a
Josh.
familiar
You are
feeling.
not
This
to
is our
echo your
dynamic.
mother's words, but we
Josh, I'm very disappointed. I understand and am used to
I'm disappointed and not surprised.
it.
well, if you have any tips for living in Vermont, you can feel free to leave those in a review or an email, and we will make sure they get to Josh as tips and where to go, places to eat, as those pretty much the most important things to him,
Nice.
or places to eat would be
Definitely.
helpful. So please feel free to share those. You can share them also with us on Instagram. At
Mhm.
I almost said Boyle County, which is where I'm at. Nope, at at Hort Culture Podcast, and we would love to hear from you. And we'll give Josh pass those tips along or any well wishes that you may have, or if you're just mad in general, you can write that
Yeah.
too. But like, still 5 stars,
Pass
okay?
along death threats, whatever you
Death
want to
threats,
do.
but give it five
Well
stars
wishes
and
death
Good
threats.
threats.
riddance, whatever
Um,
you want to say.
Thank God he's gone. If you are a bald person who would like the opportunity to be on the show, we're looking for someone. So,
Send a self-addressed postmarked envelope to Hort
and
Culture. At,
we need proof of what wax you like to use on your head. So that's
Okay, that's a lot.
Nice.
all right. Well, thanks for being here today with us, you guys. We hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and that you'll join us next time. Have a good one.